Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Six months ago, I moved to the city for my first real job after college. The salary was decent, but rent prices were insane, so I had to find a roommate. That's how I ended up living with this guy who seemed normal enough during our brief meeting at the coffee shop. He was clean, quiet, and said he respected personal space. What he didn't mention was his complete inability to understand the concept of your food versus my food. The first month was fine. We barely saw each other because of our different schedules. I work early mornings at a marketing firm and he works nights at some tech startup. But then I started noticing things disappearing from the kitchen. At first, it was small stuff. A few cookies here, some crackers there. I figured maybe I was just eating more than I remembered. Then it got worse. Way worse. I come home from grocery shopping, put away my snacks, and by the next evening they'd be gone. Not just eaten, completely wiped out. The expensive organic tortilla chips I bought as a Friday treat, gone by Saturday morning. The fancy chocolate I saved for bad days, vanished. Even my protein bars that cost $3 each started disappearing at an alarming rate. The breaking point came when I bought a family-sized bag of my absolute favorite sour cream and onion chips. I've been craving them all week and finally splurged on the good brand. I put them in the pantry before bed, and when I got up for work the next morning, the empty bag was sitting on the counter like some kind of cruel joke. That evening, I decided to have a conversation with my roommate. I told him we needed to talk about the food situation. He seemed confused and asked what I meant. I explained that my snacks kept disappearing, like all of them. He acted surprised and said he thought we were sharing everything. You know, like roommate stuff. I made it clear that we never talked about sharing food and that I buy my groceries while he buys his. He agreed and said he just assumed it was his mistake. The next week I bought more snacks. Same thing happened. When I brought it up, he got defensive. He told me he'd been really stressed with work and sometimes just grabbed whatever was around. I pointed out that he was grabbing my stuff every time and never touched the healthy food or boring stuff, just my treats. He said he'd replace it and told me to chill out. He never replaced anything, and the stealing continued. I started getting creative with where I hid my food. I put snacks in my bedroom, in my car, even in my desk drawer at work. But somehow this guy had a sixth sense for finding my stash. It was like living with a raccoon who had developed opposable thumbs and a credit card. The final straw came 3 weeks later. I'd bought a small bag of these gourmet kettle chips that cost $8. $8 for chips, which was ridiculous. But I'd had a terrible day and wanted to treat myself. I hid them in my closet behind some old textbooks. When I went to get them the next day, the bag was there, but it was empty except for crumbs. That's when I knew I had to take drastic action. I spent the weekend planning my revenge. It had to be perfect, something that would teach him a lesson without being actually harmful. That's when inspiration struck during my grocery run. I was walking past the produce section when I saw the broccoli, and suddenly I had the most beautiful, evil idea. I bought a bag of sour cream and onion chips and a bunch of fresh broccoli florets. Back home, I opened the chip bag, ate about half the chips, and then filled it with cold, raw broccoli pieces. The florets were roughly the same size and color as the chips in dim lighting. I resealed the bag with clear tape, making sure it looked untouched, and left it on the kitchen counter where he'd definitely see it. Then I waited. I didn't have to wait long. I was in my room doing some work when I heard footsteps in the kitchen. The familiar sound of a chip bag crinkling filled the air, followed by what I can only describe as the most satisfying silence I've ever experienced. Then came the confused muttering. He said, "What the hell?" in a very confused voice. I heard the fridge door open and close, then open again. More muttering. The sound of running water. I stayed in my room, trying not to laugh out loud. Finally, I heard him moving around the kitchen, probably trying to figure out what had just happened. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of water, and without even looking at him, told him I hoped it was worth it. He was standing by the sink, holding a piece of broccoli and looking like he'd just discovered aliens were real. He asked if I had put vegetables in a chip bag, sounding completely baffled. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about and pointed out that it was his food, right? Since he thought we were sharing everything. He said it was crazy and that I couldn't just do that. I explained that I could because it was my food in my bag that I bought with my money, and if he wanted chips, he should buy his own. The next day, something miraculous happened. When I came home from work, there were labels on everything in the fridge and pantry, little sticky notes with his name on them, marking his territory like he was some kind of territorial animal who'd finally learned to respect boundaries. A few days later, I found a brand new bag of the expensive chips I've been craving sitting on my desk with a note that simply said, "Sorry," in his handwriting. It's been 2 months since the Great Broccoli incident, and my snacks remain untouched. I work in marketing at a small tech company, which means I'm always on a tight budget. My husband and I have been saving for a house down payment for 3 years now, so every dollar counts. We've become pretty good at celebrating friends' successes without breaking the bank, homemade cards, thoughtful texts, sharing their posts on social media. Most people understand when you're genuinely happy for them, but can't always show it with your wallet. I met Karen through my husband's work. He's in the same department as her husband, and we've been thrown together at company events and barbecues for the past 2 years. She's always been a bit dramatic, but I figured that was just her personality. She works part-time at a daycare and has always talked about wanting to do something creative on the side. Last month, Karen posted all over social media about publishing her first children's book on Amazon. The posts were everywhere: Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn. She was calling herself an author in her bio and posting quotes about following your dreams. I was genuinely happy for her because I know how much she talked about wanting to write. She also sent me a direct text about it. I responded right away because I wanted to be supportive. I told her that when I could afford it, I'd totally buy a copy, and asked what the story was about because it sounded funny. Karen wrote back saying I'd have to buy it to find out. I thought that was a little weird. When people are excited about something they created, they usually love talking about it. But whatever, maybe she wanted to keep some mystery around it. A couple days later, my husband was looking over my shoulder when I had the book page open on my phone. He's a graphic designer, so he notices these things. He mentioned that the cover looked like it was made with artificial intelligence because the proportions were off and the style was too generic. I was just curious, so I texted Karen to ask who did her illustrations. I wasn't trying to be rude or anything. I know plenty of people who use artificial intelligence for their projects now, and there's nothing wrong with that if you're upfront about it. Karen responded that she used Canva artificial intelligence. I didn't really care either way. Lots of people use artificial intelligence tools for small projects when they can't afford to hire professional artists. I was in the middle of cooking dinner, so I just put my phone down and forgot to respond right away. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with Karen asking why I had asked about the illustrations. I was still busy and didn't see the message immediately. 20 minutes later, another text came through where she demanded to know if I was going to reply or not. Now I was confused. Why was she getting so worked up over a simple question? I tried to keep things light and told her I was just curious. I didn't want to tell her that my husband thought it looked like artificial intelligence because that seemed potentially hurtful. I figured it was better to just leave it at curiosity. Then came the explosion, a long paragraph that made my jaw drop. She wrote that she already had one friend criticizing her book, and then there was me. She said I gave no congratulations, just asked about the artwork like I was trying to find something negative. She demanded that I be honest about why I was asking. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. She was accusing me of being unsupportive and looking for problems with her book. I was completely blindsided. I told her to please calm down and explain that I couldn't afford to buy her book right now. I said that when people are proud of something, they usually enjoy talking about it. So I thought asking questions was a way to show I was interested. Radio silence after that. No response, no acknowledgement, nothing. The next week at work, my husband mentioned that Karen's husband had pulled him aside. He said Karen was upset that I didn't congratulate her on the book. I reminded my husband that I did congratulate her. I said I'd buy a copy when I could afford it and asked about the story. My husband told me that apparently that wasn't enough for her. This is where it gets really awkward. My husband and Karen's husband have to travel to a conference together next month, and the company is putting them up in Karen's husband's house to save money. Since spouses are invited to the work dinner, I'm supposed to stay overnight at their place too. The thought of being trapped in her house after this ridiculous text fight makes my stomach turn. I spent days replaying our conversation, wondering if I'd somehow been rude without realizing it. But the more I thought about it, the more frustrated I became. I had been supportive. I said I'd buy her book. I asked interested questions, and I called her story funny. What more did she want? The night before the trip, I decided I wasn't going to hide in the guest room like some scared teenager. If Karen wanted to be dramatic about a perfectly normal conversation, that was her problem. When we arrived at their house, Karen answered the door with the fakest smile I'd ever seen. She greeted us coldly and barely looked at me before immediately starting to chat with my husband about work stuff. Her husband seemed normal, but I could feel the tension radiating from Karen. During dinner, she kept making pointed comments about real friends and people who support your dreams. I just ate my food and let her passive-aggressive comments bounce off me. Finally, when she made some comment about how some people just can't be happy for others, I'd had enough. I told her that if she had something to say to me, she should just say it directly. Karen snapped that I was completely unsupportive of her book. She claimed I gave no congratulations, just criticism. I pointed out that I said I'd buy a copy when I could afford it and that the story sounded funny. I asked how that wasn't congratulatory. She argued that I immediately started questioning her artwork like I was looking for problems. I explained that I asked one question about who did the illustrations because I was curious. I reminded her that she told me it was artificial intelligence, and I didn't even respond negatively to that. She demanded to know why I asked in the first place. I told her that when people are excited about projects, they usually like talking about the process. Artists love discussing their work. I thought she'd want to share about how she created it. Her husband looked uncomfortable, and my husband was staring at his plate. Karen insisted that it felt like I was trying to find something wrong with it. I replied that her reaction said more about her insecurity than it did about my question. The room went dead quiet. I continued telling her that I was trying to be supportive within my budget. I explained that I can't afford to buy every book my friends publish, but I can ask interested questions and share in their excitement. I said if that wasn't good enough for her, then maybe we had different ideas about friendship. Karen mumbled that she just expected more enthusiasm. I asked if she expected me to fake enthusiasm I couldn't afford to back up with money. I told her I was being genuine within my means. She didn't have a response to that. The rest of the evening was awkward, but at least the fake pleasantries were over. The next morning when we were packing to leave, Karen's husband pulled my husband aside. Apparently, Karen had spent half the night complaining about me, and he was tired of hearing about it. He told my husband that he had told Karen she was being ridiculous and that I was perfectly nice about the book thing. My husband thanked him and said we were starting to think we were crazy. Karen's husband apologized and said she does this sometimes. She gets an idea in her head and can't let it go. He was sorry we got caught up in it. When we loaded our car, Karen came out to say goodbye. She still seemed sulky, but she managed to be civil. She thanked us for coming to dinner, and I thanked her for having us. Then she made one final jab, suggesting that maybe next time I could actually buy the book. I told her that maybe next time she could appreciate genuine support instead of demanding performative enthusiasm. My husband quickly got in the car, and we drove away. I later found out that Karen's book had only sold 12 copies total, and most of those were to family members. Apparently, the hilarious bedtime story was actually just a poorly written tale about a unicorn who couldn't find his rainbow. It was artificial intelligence artwork that looked like it was generated in about 5 minutes. When I first moved into my neighborhood, the homeowner association seemed reasonable enough. Standard rules about lawn care no loud music after 10, keep your trash cans out of sight. Normal stuff. But about 6 months ago, things started getting weird when Karen became the new president. Karen is one of those people who thinks being in charge of a homeowner association makes her some kind of neighborhood dictator. She's always prowling around with her clipboard, measuring grass height, and checking if anyone's car is parked 2 inches over the line. The woman has way too much time on her hands. Last Tuesday, I was sitting at my kitchen table working on a logo design when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Karen standing there with her usual scowl and clipboard. Karen told me she needed to discuss a violation with me. When I asked what kind of violation, she explained that I had been running an unauthorized business from my residential property. She said that according to Section 12 of their community guidelines, commercial activities were strictly prohibited in residential areas. I stared at her for a moment, trying to process what she was saying. I told her that I worked from home doing graphic design and wasn't running a storefront or anything, just using my computer. Then Karen said something that made my blood run cold. She told me that yesterday at 2:15 in the afternoon, I had received a business call where I discussed pricing for a website redesign project. She said I had quoted $800 for the work and scheduled a meeting for next Friday. She was absolutely right about the call details. But how could she possibly know that? I had been alone in my house talking to a potential client about a small restaurant's website. I asked her how she knew what I discussed on a private phone call in my own home. She said that wasn't important, and what mattered was that I was in violation. She handed me a piece of paper with a $200 penalty written on it, and warned me that if this continued, they would have to take further action. After she left, I sat there staring at the fine, my mind racing. There was no way she could have heard that conversation unless she was somehow listening in. The more I thought about it, the more paranoid I became. I started searching my house room by room. I checked behind picture frames, under tables, inside light fixtures. It took me 3 hours, but finally I found it. A tiny camera no bigger than a button, tucked behind my kitchen curtain with a perfect view of where I usually sit to take calls. I was furious, but I knew I needed proof of what Karen was doing. That's when I called my cousin Mike, who's a police officer in the next town over. When I told Mike what happened, he confirmed that what Karen was doing was definitely illegal. He said we needed to catch her in the act and get her to confess. We came up with a plan. The next day I made sure to sit in my usual spot and pretended to take a business call. I spoke loudly and clearly, making up details about a fake project. I told the fake client that I could definitely design their company's new logo and that for a project this size, I would charge $1,500. I asked if we could meet Thursday at 3 o'clock. I went on for about 10 minutes, making sure to include specific details that Karen would remember. Sure enough, 2 days later, she showed up at my door with another fine. She told me she had warned me to stop conducting business from my home, and that yesterday I had another client call about a logo design. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. She insisted I not lie to her and said I had quoted $1,500 and scheduled a meeting for Thursday at 3. I said that was impossible and asked how she would know what I said in my own house. She told me she had her ways and demanded I pay the fine or face legal action. That's when Mike stepped out from where he'd been hiding around the corner of my house. He identified himself as Officer Johnson with the county police and said he wanted to ask her some questions about how she obtained this information. Karen's face went white. She said she didn't have to answer any questions. Mike told her that actually she did. He explained that they had reason to believe she'd been illegally surveilling my residence and asked how she knew the details of that phone conversation. Karen stammered that she was just passing by and heard voices. Mike pointed out that the conversation took place inside the house with all windows closed, so there was no way she could have heard anything from outside. Karen started getting flustered, probably realizing she was trapped. Mike told her they had already found the camera she planted and that her fingerprints were all over it. He said this was her chance to cooperate. That's when Karen completely lost it. She admitted that yes, she had put a camera in there, but insisted that I was violating community rules and she had to prove it somehow. Mike asked when she installed the camera. She said it was last month when I went out of town for the weekend and that she had a key to all the properties for emergencies. When Mike asked if she had done this to other residents, Karen said she had only targeted the troublemakers. She explained that the Johnsons were having parties past quiet hours and the Smiths weren't following the landscaping rules. She said she needed evidence. Mike pulled out his handcuffs and told her she was under arrest for unlawful surveillance, breaking and entering, and violation of privacy laws. Karen was still yelling about how she was just trying to maintain community standards. Several neighbors had come out to watch, and I could see the shock on their faces when they realized what had been happening. It turns out Karen had planted cameras in 5 different houses over the past 4 months. She'd been using her position as president and her emergency keys to break into people's homes whenever they went out of town. The whole thing was a massive invasion of privacy disguised as community enforcement. The Homeowner Association Board immediately removed Karen from her position and revoked her access to any community property. She ended up facing multiple felony charges and had to pay substantial fines to all the families she'd violated. I live in a small apartment complex where everyone pretty much knows each other. My neighbor across the hall is a single mom with 2 toddlers, a 3-year-old boy and a 2-year-old girl. She seems nice enough, always says hello in the hallway, but I wouldn't say we're close friends or anything. About 6 months ago, she was in a real bind. Her usual babysitter had canceled last minute and she had an important job interview. She knocked on my door looking really stressed and explained the situation. Since I was just working on some basic design edits that day and felt bad for her, I agreed to watch the kids for a couple hours. The kids were pretty well behaved, and she came back right when she said she would, with coffee and donuts as a thank you. That one favor gave her the wrong idea about our arrangement. A few weeks later, she asked again. This time it was for a doctor's appointment that got moved up suddenly. Again, I said yes because emergencies happen and I try to be a good neighbor. The kids played quietly while I worked, and everything was fine. But then it started happening more often. A quick grocery run here, a hair appointment there. Each time she'd knock on my door with some story about how she was in a rush and just needed a quick favor. I started saying no sometimes, but she'd always have some excuse about how important whatever she was doing was. The breaking point came last Tuesday morning. I had a really important video call scheduled with a potential new client, the kind of meeting that could land me a contract worth several $1,000s. I'd been preparing for weeks and had set up my home office to look professional with good lighting and a clean background. I was literally 5 minutes away from joining the call when I heard frantic knocking at my door. Through the peephole, I could see her standing there with both kids. I opened the door and asked what was going on, explaining that I had an important meeting starting in a few minutes. She told me she needed me to watch the kids for about an hour because she was meeting some friends for brunch and was already running late. I tried to explain that I couldn't help right now because I had a work meeting in literally 5 minutes. But before I could say anything else, she was already pushing past me into my apartment. She thanked me and said I was a lifesaver, mentioning that the kids just had breakfast, so they should be good. She said she'd be back in an hour, maybe 2 at most. I watched in complete shock when she handed me a diaper bag and headed straight for my door. I tried to stop her, telling her she couldn't just leave them here because I had told her about my meeting. She brushed off my concerns, saying it was fine because they were really good kids and I could just put on some cartoons or something. And with that, she was gone. I could hear her car starting up outside while I stood there with 2 confused toddlers looking up at me. I immediately called her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. My client meeting was starting in 2 minutes. I tried calling again. Still voicemail. The 3-year-old started asking where his mom went, and the 2-year-old began crying. I had no choice but to join my video call with 2 toddlers in the background. I tried to explain the situation quickly to my client, but I could tell they weren't impressed. Throughout the entire 30-minute presentation, the kids were making noise, asking for snacks, and the little girl had a complete meltdown when she couldn't find her stuffed animal. I didn't get the contract. After the call ended, I tried calling her again. This time she actually answered. I told her she needed to come get her kids right now because I had told her about my important work meeting. She acted like it wasn't a big deal, asking what the problem was since I was home anyway. She said it wasn't like I was going anywhere. I explained that the big deal was that I was working and had just lost a major client because I couldn't focus during our meeting. I reminded her that her kids weren't my responsibility. She called me dramatic and said it was just for a little bit longer because they hadn't even ordered their food yet. I told her I didn't care if they hadn't ordered food and that she needed to come get them now, or I would call Child Protective Services. She got defensive, saying I wouldn't dare and that she was a good mother. I told her to prove it by actually taking care of her own children instead of dumping them on neighbors who didn't agree to babysit. She hung up on me, but 20 minutes later, I heard her stomping up the stairs. When I opened the door, she looked furious. She called me selfish, saying she was just trying to have one morning with her friends and that she never got any time to herself. I told her that I never got any time to work when she kept dropping her kids off without asking properly, and that I wasn't running a free daycare service. She said fine, that she wouldn't ask me for any more favors then. I told her good, and that just to be clear, I wanted her to reimburse me for the income I lost that day because of her stunt. She asked if I was insane and said she wasn't paying me anything. That's when I pulled out my phone and showed her the recording I'd made of our earlier conversation, where she admitted to leaving the kids without my permission. I told her that I guess I'd be filing a report with Child Services about her abandoning her children with an unwilling neighbor, and that I was sure they'd be very interested in the recording. She knew I had her. She accused me of recording her illegally. I explained that it was perfectly legal in our state when one party consents, which I did. I asked her what it was going to be: pay me the $800 I lost from that contract, or deal with Child Services. She stood there fuming for a full minute before finally agreeing to pay me. She wrote me a check right there in the hallway, grabbed her kids, and hasn't spoken to me since. Both my parents are Mexican, but I got lucky with my complexion. My mom had snow white skin, super fair with dark hair. My dad was a bit darker than her, but still pretty light. So naturally, I ended up with fair skin and dark hair too. When I was 3, my family moved to Mexico for my dad's work. We lived there for 15 years, so I basically grew up there. Spanish became my second nature, though English was still my first language since we spoke it at home. When we moved back to the United States when I was 18, I thought the hardest part would be adjusting to American culture again. Boy, was I wrong. The comments started almost immediately. Every time I'd speak Spanish with someone at the grocery store, at work, or just out and about, people would give me this weird look. Then came the question that I've probably heard 1,000 times by now. They'd ask where I learned to speak Spanish so well. I'd explain that I'm Mexican and lived there for most of my childhood. Then, without fail, comes the response that makes my blood boil. They'd tell me I don't look Mexican at all. Depending on who says it and how they say it, I've developed different responses. Sometimes I just ignore it. Sometimes I educate them. But when someone's being particularly ignorant or rude about it, I have a go-to response that usually shuts them up pretty quick. Last month, I was at the electronics store looking for a new phone case. The place was packed, and I was waiting in line behind this older woman who was giving the cashier a hard time about returning something without a receipt. The cashier was clearly struggling with English, so I stepped in to help translate. I asked the cashier in Spanish if he needed help and what I could do to assist. The cashier looked relieved and explained in Spanish that the woman wanted to return a phone case she bought 3 months ago without a receipt, and store policy only allowed returns within 30 days with proof of purchase. I turned to the woman and explained the policy in English. She seemed grateful at first and thanked me for helping. Then she asked where I learned to speak Spanish so well. I told her I was Mexican and had lived in Mexico for 15 years. The woman looked me up and down like she was examining a piece of fruit at the grocery store. She said I didn't look Mexican at all and asked if I was sure I wasn't confused about my heritage. I felt my eye twitch. This lady really just asked me if I was confused about my own ethnicity. I told her that she didn't look stupid, but here we were. Her mouth dropped open like a fish. The cashier behind the counter was trying not to laugh, and I could hear a few chuckles from people in line behind us. The woman got offended and asked how I dared to speak to her that way. She claimed she was just asking a simple question. I replied that I had given her a simple answer and asked what exactly a Mexican person was supposed to look like according to her. She stumbled over her words, saying something about darker skin and maybe an accent. I pointed out that she was basically saying all Mexican people had to look the same, which was like saying all Americans had to look like her. The woman's face was getting red now. She clearly wasn't used to being called out on her ignorance. She demanded to speak to the manager and complained that I was being incredibly rude to her for no reason. The manager came over and the woman launched into this dramatic story about how I had insulted her for no reason. When she finished, the manager asked me if this was true. I explained that she had told me I didn't look Mexican and asked if I was confused about my own heritage. I had responded that she didn't look stupid, but appearances could be deceiving. The manager, who I noticed had a slight accent himself, just nodded and told the woman he was going to have to ask her to leave. He said they didn't tolerate discrimination against employees or customers. The woman protested, claiming she wasn't discriminating and was just making an observation. The manager explained that questioning someone's ethnicity based on their appearance and suggesting they were confused about their own heritage was discrimination. He asked her to leave. The woman started going on about how this was ridiculous and she was never shopping there again. When she stormed out, she turned back to yell at me that we people were all the same and always playing the victim. I cheerfully told her she was right, that us Mexican people did tend to stick together, and wished her a great day. The whole store erupted in applause. The cashier thanked me in Spanish, and several other customers came up to me afterward saying they dealt with similar comments and were glad someone finally stood up to someone like that. The manager even gave me a discount on my phone case and told me I was welcome in the store anytime. He said he dealt with customers like that woman regularly and was tired of it. The funny thing is, this happens so often that I've started keeping a mental tally. Last count, I'm at about 3 comments about not looking Mexican per month. It's like people think there's some kind of Mexican handbook that dictates how we're all supposed to look. What really gets me is the assumption that because I don't fit their stereotype, I must be lying or confused. Like my 15 years in Mexico, my family, my culture, and my identity are all just things I made up for fun. The worst part is when people double down after I call them out. They act like I'm the one being unreasonable for pointing out their ignorance. But honestly, I've stopped caring about hurting their feelings. If they're comfortable enough to question my ethnicity based on my appearance, they should be comfortable enough to hear my response. I've gotten pretty good at reading people too. I can usually tell within the first few seconds of the conversation whether someone is genuinely curious or just being ignorant. The genuine ones get a patient explanation. The ignorant ones get the full treatment. My parents think I should just ignore it. But I figure if I don't speak up, these people will just keep making the same stupid comments to other people who might not have the confidence to respond. At least this way, maybe they'll think twice before assuming someone's ethnicity based on their appearance. Besides, the look on their faces when I fire back is usually worth it. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.